Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. I'm your host today and every day, Nathan Chaney. And this is the podcast where we follow the same format every time. We talk to the experts and the doers of supply chain, and we try to tease out some of their personal stories, their professional insights, and also talk to them about the nuts and bolts of what they do. And today we actually have a special treat in that we have Tom Strain from Surgere. Surgere actually being the podcast sponsor for the Supply Chain podcast for 2 years just about now. And every now and then we grab one of them and bring them on camera so we can keep learning more about what they do, sharing kind of what they do with the world. And so with that, Tom, welcome to the Supply Chain podcast. I'll step aside for a moment here and let you do a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Nathan. Great to be here today. My name is Tom Strain, and really I'm the VP of technology at Surgere, but really I'm a tech geek at heart.
Okay.
That's what I've been doing most of my career. Knew I wanted to be in computers probably around the 8th or ninth grade year. Never had a computer until I graduated high school. However, I knew that's what I wanted to be. And sure enough, went to college at Youngstown State for several years. And yeah, that's what I did. I'm a computer science, computer information systems major, and that's what I've been doing pretty much my entire career. On the personal side, I do have two kids. One's halfway through college, so yay for me. And one is will be a senior in high school this coming up year. And it's interesting when you look at, your kids, from my perspective, early on, sports was my life, baseball, football primarily. And
Okay.
then I got into music later in my high school years. And, after high school, played in bands and recorded albums and things like that as a guitar player and a singer-songwriter. And the interesting thing, my daughter is now in a rock band, so it's really cool to go see shows with her. And my son is a baseball player and looking to play in college, hopefully. So it's just been, the whole nature of being a parent and see your kids kind of pursuing two of your passions is pretty neat. Been married for over 20 years to my wife, Nicole, who kind of keeps us all together. So that's a little bit about me.
All right. All right. I appreciate the shout out to parenthood there. And I'm a little bit jealous that your kids are interested in following in your footsteps. My son seems not interested whatsoever, even though I've given him this great last name that he could totally run with. But anywho, that's a topic for another day. Let's dig a little bit more into the personal story here. We want to try to peel back the layers and understand, the origins of the people that are making the technology and making supply chains today hum. So tell me a little about, where were you born? Obviously you were into sports and whatnot, but tell us a little about those formative years.
Sure. So I grew up in a town called Youngstown, Ohio, in a smaller town called Girard. A lot of people may not know what Girard is. It's a suburb of Youngstown, and I'm one of five kids, so my entire family still lives there. In Girard, it was all about sports. It's really a small town. Everybody kind of knew everybody for the most part, and growing up in that type of town, it was, you're outside till the street lights come on. This was, well before smart devices and mobile phones and things like that. So growing up in Girard, again, it was, sports was my primary thing. Throughout high school, kind of got into music a little bit. And, really, during those times, being one of five kids, family was very, very important. So the idea of having, Sunday dinners and that kind of thing was pretty much the norm in my household. So, having those values and, growing up in that type of environment was really, kind of special, to me. And I think to my siblings, because at that time there was a lot of, maybe single parent households and things like that that we didn't really have to deal with during the formative years. From high school, I went to Youngstown State and studied computer science and CIS. And really, during that time, I thought I wanted to be a coder, Turns out I didn't want to be a coder, but I learned that pretty early on, and I was much more interested in technology solutions and, technology products and things like that, which is really kind of where my career has taken me. Once I graduated, or actually about a year before I graduated college, I started my first IT job at General Motors. There's a manufacturing plant in Warren, Ohio, that I worked at for the first, 7 or 8 years of my career. Started in IT directly, so servers and workstations and software and things like that. And then for the last few years, I actually was the only non-electrical engineer, controls engineer. So I own the airproofing system in General Assembly, which really showed me how to bring hardware together and software in order to solve problems. Right, that's kind of where I really started to understand what that looked like on a grand scale, because at that time, that General Motors plant was 3 shift operation and building, probably 500 cars a shift in different times. So that's kind of where I got my start. Realized after 7 years or so that, manufacturing IT directly was not where I wanted to be. At the time, I wanted to be more in, this was before software as a service, but it was more on the software side. So I left General Motors for an opportunity at a global healthcare company called PerkinElmer, where I came in as a project manager to manage software configurations and installations at state laboratories, as well as maternal fetal health laboratories globally. And during my time there, learned a lot about the international landscape. uh, Fun fact, one of the products that I owned for several years was not sold in the United States, so it was sold in Canada, Europe, Asia. So that led to a lot of traveling and things like that, as you could imagine, as the product owner or the product manager for that portfolio. And really enjoyed my time at PerkinElmer. I left there as a director of informatics. So I had a global team of around 50 in total, where we did everything with informatics and software related to newborn screening and maternal fetal health. Had teams in the United States, also within Europe and Finland. So Finland was where our R&D center was. So spent a lot of time there. And around that time is when, my children were very small. My daughter was 2 or 3, my son was 1, and I had made the decision that I did not want to travel 50, 60% of the time anymore. That's kind of what the travel was at the time. So, interestingly, in my career, this is where I boomerang a little bit. So, I left PerkinElmer. I went to a automotive software company called OE Connection. Um, it was a company at the time that was owned by General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. We did everything with original equipment parts. So I came in to lead development teams. Within the first 6, 7 months, became the product manager of the e-commerce, a portfolio of products. Then there were some organizational changes at PerkinElmer. I went back to lead the global product management team for a while. It was a lot less travel. And then I went back to OE Connection a second time. So the whole boomerang thing, I did it twice. That's kind of unique. A lot of people don't get that opportunity twice. But I went back to OE Connection to really build out their BI platform. It was a greenfield opportunity. OE Connection was sitting on just tons of different data on different databases, disparate data sources. And really what I was brought back to do was kind of build out a monetization or a commercialization strategy for that data, bring all of the data into one central warehouse and really use it for the thousands of clients that were on the platform every day. So
Yeah.
um, I was there for, 3 or 4 years, and then that's what brought me to Surgere, where I'm at now. I came to Surgere in 2019, so I've been here a little over 7 years now, and I came in to build BI. It was as really close to what went back to OE Connection to do, so it was interesting. So I came in and built out the BI platform, selected the tools so that we can, provide meaningful data back to our clients. And then about a year into that role, I became the VP of technology, which is what I've been doing the last 5.5 years.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. That was maybe the most concise walkthrough of a person's experience there. I appreciated that boomerang concept. But I want to kind of back up a little bit more into your idea of thinking you wanted to be a coder and then not being one. I was about to say, being one of five kids, being out till the streetlights comes on, playing all the sports. Whenever I heard you saying that one time, one thing I hear consistently is people that have grown up in just very hands-on sort of world and kind of living in the physical world and not being gamers and not being online all the time is that they like to work with their hands. They came from baseball and football and sports. And I felt like that maybe was where you were going with the coding, sitting at a computer all day isn't for me. How did that growing up years you think influence what you decided to ultimately do with the rest of your life?
Yeah, this is going to sound very odd.
Okay.
Um, I remember as a kid seeing a commercial for a Tornado, which was a GM vehicle. And the Tornado for that model year, it had a computer in the dash in the cluster area. And for whatever reason, I was mesmerized by, oh my good, there's a computer in the car. Like what mine was blown, right? And so like, that I distinctly remember that commercial because I remember just being just mesmerized by that. So, at the time there was no internet or anything, so it's not like you looked up different things, but I had a buddy of mine who had a little Mac computer. So when I'd go to his house for sleepovers or whatever, we would play computer games and things like that. And I just wanted to not only play the game, but understand how do you get to the game and what do the files look like, all of that kind of thing. Because again, we didn't have a computer. My graduation money is what I used to buy my first computer, right? When I graduated high school. So I don't know what sparked that, but just that whole technology piece and really computers. I mean, if you remember, like at that time, that's when Windows 95 just came out, like the year that I graduated high school. So that was a big deal going from Windows 3.1 to 95. And I remember when I did get my first computer, they had a Weezer a music video that was on the disc, and I thought, that was the coolest thing ever. So really, I would say I thought I wanted to do it, right? And I always said, oh yeah, I want to do computer stuff when I went to college. But then when I got into college and got into some of the classes, it just kind of took over for me. I'm like, yeah, this is definitely what I want to do. I did take several coding classes, Nathan, right? And I consider myself a hack as a coder because I can do it. I still do it sometimes. But to be a coder full time was not, I was more interested in the total solution, talking to customers and understanding pain points and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where the deviation happened. But I did write, several programs over the years through the classes and stuff like that.
Uh, okay, so you call it a tornado. Is that like the fancy Italian way to say tornado or something? Or like
I
walk
think
me
that
through that
Yeah, I think it was an Oldsmobile Toronado, so it was a
tornado.
Toronado. Yes.
Okay.
That's how I'm pretty sure that's how they said it on the commercial. It's not the
We'll
Italians
fact
coming
check
out
you
and like,
later. There you go.
right, right. Yeah, I
I
just
believe you.
remember seeing that, and it's such a weird memory if I think, if you think about it, but that's what I
Yeah.
remember.
And then if you connect that to the fact that you did end up at GM a
Yeah,
couple of times later,
exactly right.
like, that's the crazy part of that story.
Right.
Um,
It's interesting. It seems like every stop I go back to automotive somehow, right?
mhm,
I was,
mhm.
GM and then medical device software. And then, I went to GM several times with OE Connection. And then
Right.
now with Surgere, some of our top clients are automotive manufacturers.
Right.
I must have automotive in my blood. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Talk me through what was your first car that you had? I think that says a little bit about people.
Yeah. So a little embarrassing maybe. So my first car was an AMC, Renault.
Mhm.
So it lasted about 6 months,
Okay.
and it kind of died. So that's officially my first car, but my second car was a 1986 Ford Escort with a four-speed manual shift hatchback, and I absolutely love that car. So my first car was the Renault or the AMC,
Mhm. Mhm.
but my really first car that I drove for a few years was the '86 Escort. So
Okay. All right. All right. I like it. I think we all remember our first cars. I think that's something,
Yeah,
they could be the weirdest looking thing today to the general normal public, but to us, they hold a special place
definitely.
in our hearts. And undoubtedly for you, having spent time and actually worked in the automotive industry some. Um, so I'm looking here, if I'm looking at the dates here correctly, you started at GM in 2000. And when I'm talking to someone in the computer world
Yeah.
that was doing things in 2000, I always want to ask about your experience with Y2K and what was kind of going through your mind and where were you when Y2K happened?
Absolutely. So, the interesting thing about GM is I started in General Motors in February of 2000, right? So I missed all of the drama. And, my direct manager was the IT manager. So, talking to him during the interview process, like in January, and, you know, I I couldn't even imagine the angst that was on his plate at the time because they had all kind of people on call ready, keyboard ready, like at the turn of midnight. And I remember him telling me they were hiring just tons of COBOL programmers and programmers that, people don't program in that language anymore. And these folks were getting any hourly rate they wanted to come back just to make sure, right, that in the end that the clock didn't flip back to 1900 and cause all kind of chaos. So I just missed it. And where I was before, it was not quite a big a deal. But if you think of General Motors, right, they have mainframe systems and they have Linux, they have all kind of different Unix systems and things like that have been around for 20 and 30 years in some cases. So those were the type of systems that if Y2K were to impact it, those would be the ones that would be impacted, right? So yeah, he had told me stories of just, weekends and all kind of things where people were just making sure, checking every program, checking every possible use case within the plant to make sure that there was no incident. And sure enough, there wasn't. But I missed it by 2 months. Had I been there 6 months prior, maybe I'm not in technology anymore. Who knows?
So okay, I remember stocking up like canned goods and stuff in the house, like in it was like it was a whole different kind of New Year's ball drop that year because it was like what will happen the next second. Do you remember? I don't remember there being any. Was there anything that went wrong anywhere? What
No,
was there any headlines after the next day?
I don't believe so. I'm sure there were some small things, but not catastrophic. Because remember at the time they were like, oh well, nuclear missiles may go off because of something, right? There was some, how much of that was conspiracy theory versus realist, who knows? But I do not recall that. Actually, I recall that New Year's Eve, I had the flu or something, so I was by myself watching Back to the Future when we brought in the year 2000. And I don't recall any, major things coming up the next day in the news.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, good times, old times. Back when things were a little simpler.
Yes,
Um,
for sure.
so let's talk a bit about. So we went through your career there a little bit. Up to today. I'm curious, like some of your insights. If we zoom out to kind of a high level about business and technology and innovation and adoption over the years, is any like words of wisdom? If you were giving a class, a graduating class, a commencement speech today, and you were talking about what you've been able to see over your time in technology and BI. What are some of your big takeaways? What are some of the insights?
If one thing that a lot of people think about is, when you build software, you build a program and then it's done, you go to the next software. To me, that can't be further from the truth. Like when you build software, you're constantly nurturing it, you're constantly adding new features, new enhancements. If we think about AI right now, right? 10 years ago, that was not necessarily something we were looking to build into any product. However, in order to be competitive, you have to bring those kind of enhancements or features into products. So, one thing over the years, I've been in technology, gosh, over 26 years now. And one thing that I'm continually amazed about is just the vast amounts of data that we continue to create, right? Whether that's in manufacturing, whether that's in supply chain, whether that's in really any industry, there is so much more data being created every single year, not because there are necessarily more users or that things are changing so much workflow wise, but people want more information, right? People always want to know more, want to be able to collect as much data as possible to try to be more efficient or to try to, you know, um, do a variety of different things with that data. So over the years, the interesting piece to me is that as we continue to collect all of this data, okay, it's great, but what do you do with it, right? What do you do with all of this data? Because there's only so much a human can actually do with so much data before it just becomes almost impossible to kind of act on. So, over the years, I feel like, just that collection of data, we're right at the precipice, in my opinion, where we have the technology with AI and things like that to make sense of all of the data that maybe we've been collecting over the last 10, 15 years. And that's going to continue to happen, right? Because we want to know more and more information as we go. If you liken it back to sports, for example, it seems like every year, baseball specific, I'm a big baseball guy, there's more and more statistics that are being calculated and that are being created and that are being kind of measured against each other to try to figure out how to draft a player or whatever the case may be. So it's kind of that same kind of thing. 30 years ago, can the guy hit? Oh yeah, he could hit. Can the guy pitch? Sure, he throws hard. But now the metrics are absolutely insane, and it's all about collecting as much data as possible in order to make the best decision that we can in our situation.
At the time of this recording, the World Cup is going on, and we've got a computer chip in the ball to know exactly when it was hit and whether someone was offsides. And I mean, yes, technology is intruding to every component of life. I've got one for you though here. What you were just speaking, and I remember even the concepts of big data was like almost this whole specialty. And I haven't even heard the term big data in like 10 years. I think that was a thing. And now I think just everything became big data, like just data. It was just assumed everyone's got lots of data. We don't need to like compartmentalize it into its own specialty anymore, I guess.
Right. No, agree. Big data was that was the big word, like you said, probably 8 to 10 years ago. And at that
Yeah.
time, big data was, oh, we're going to get all of the weather data for all these weather patterns for the entire country and be able to leverage that data within solutions. That was big data. It was more like external, some formatted, some unformatted data, right? And that notion of big data it just became data because compute has become not only more powerful, but more affordable, right? Space is not an issue. I mean, spinning up a terabyte or a few like that's low cost and it's easy to do. And just the type of, cloud computing and all of the hardware that has gone into this industry, big data, in my opinion, is just data at this point in time. I bet you if we were to look at what was classified as big data 10 years ago compared to now, we'd probably laugh a little bit because it's there's big data everywhere, and it just becomes how do you want to use it.
Right. And I think at Surgere, y'all are part of that big data collection apparatus, if you
Oh,
will.
for sure.
Um, so before we go into more into Surgere, I just want to like have one more little high level thought provoking conversation here, which is certainly that sort of that spectrum or that concept of data creates information, enough information creates knowledge, and enough knowledge creates wisdom, that sort of
The whole pyramid.
um,
Mhm.
pyramid. And I feel like what's happened is our ability for everyone to be able to get closer to the knowledge and wisdom components of data. I feel like earlier days in technology, it was like we've got data and information, but how do we make knowledge with this? How do we extract wisdom and make decisions out of this smartly? And I feel like now, a little bit with the AI capabilities and everything, just state of technology is everyone's got more access to knowledge and wisdom, which I think just is like this tide that's makes all the boats rise a bit in business. I don't know. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
No, you're exactly right, Nathan. I mean, the high tide raises all boats, right? That's kind of the saying. And when it comes to being able to make data actionable, just the vast amounts that's being collected is very difficult to do it on our own. And AI is helping us do that. I want to be cautious that AI has not solved the problem, though. What I mean by that is AI, you still have to, your own wisdom still has to come from within, because AI is going to be biased in certain situations, right? AI may, they call them AI hallucinations, or it may hallucinate certain types of information the way that you're asking the question. So it almost could create fake wisdom, if you will. That's not really a term, but the only thing I would say is, now that AI as a tool in order to bring all of the data together and to analyze that data and present it back in such a meaningful way, so you do get that knowledge, which will lead to multiple ways or multiple times going through getting the same type of knowledge, kind of turns to wisdom over time. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now. All of these tools are so good at analyzing data and so good at summarizing things and bringing things all together, but still, as humans, in my opinion, we still need to form our own opinions and form our own thoughts on what is being presented back to us. And I think that's really the key.
Yes, and I've got to go figure out who to attribute this to, but one of my podcast guests said that AI could be considered the chief recommendation officer of
That
an
is,
organization.
yes.
And man, I'm kicking myself right now because I need to go attribute that quote to someone, and I got to go find it in the last 100 episodes.
Yeah.
But I use that one quite often. Let's turn the page here and dig a little bit into the Surgere side of Tom here. A little bit of what your role is and I guess in what Surgere's role is in the supply chain industry.
Sure. So, I lead our technology organization here at Surgere. So, my organization is constructed of, we have software development folks, we have our BI and AI data analysts, we have all the data and DBAs and things like that. We also have technical project managers that kind of run the technology side of projects with our clients, and we have a customer care organization which is responsible for caring for our customers, the ticketing systems and making sure our customers are well cared for. And we also have a team that we have a technical center that's off site, where we do a lot of validation of hardware in different types of RFID tags or ultra wideband tags, different technologies that help provide visibility. In the end, Surgere, we provide the answer to where is my stuff. That's kind of like internally what we say. We answer that question. We provide visibility through many different means of any types of assets that you can imagine, from returnable containers to metal racks to finished goods to raw materials. Really, what Surgere does is we find the right engineered solution to bring visibility to any type of asset that's either within my internal supply chain, within my four walls, outside in my lot, or throughout the supply chain, more grand, country to country or state to state. So, that's kind of what, my team is kind of at the crux of the technology piece, making sure that the hardware that we validate and that we approve are able to get the 99.9% data accuracy that we insist upon. We're using the correct type of medium, RFID tags or ultra wideband tags, to make sure that we get that level of data acquisition. And then the software that brings everything in to the software platform so that we can provide knowledge and wisdom back to our clients based on the vast amounts of data that are coming into our platform. So any given month, Nathan, we are processing about 15 billion transactions. So there's a lot of data coming in through a lot of different areas that our platform is responsible for, not only maintaining and not only ensuring that data security and all of those types of things, but feeding the reporting and feeding dashboards and feeding some of the AI components that we're building, so that there's actionable insights to be had by our clients.
Yeah, how many team members do you have monitoring those 15 billion data points that you're grabbing every month? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's big data, that for sure, right?
that's a lot of, absolutely. And on my team, we have 20 folks that are on the team. And it's interesting when I'm talking about AI. If you could imagine, we have just several thousands of devices that are across all of our customer client ecosystems, and all of those devices, they talk back to us every minute to say, "I'm here." It's a notion of a heartbeat. So a few years ago, we had teams of people that were monitoring those heartbeats. And if something went off for a certain period of time, we would create a ticket and do all of the stuff that we do. But about a year and a half ago, we created an AI agent that is monitoring all of those things on our behalf, automatically emailing the right contact and automatically creating and closing tickets based on the status of that hardware. So you talk about, as we're growing as a company, right, over the last 7 years, we've grown tremendously. So when you're going to managing maybe 1,000 devices to upwards of 4 or 5,000, right? You have to find ways to become more efficient at that. So that's where, we deployed an AI agent to kind of monitor all of that for us and handle that. So yeah, it's not just us, looking at how can we allow our clients to get better insights or actionable insights from us, is how do we help ourselves to manage the business as we continue to grow and expand into different areas.
I have followed along the Surgere story. I've had Bill, the founder, on the podcast, Michael and marketing on the podcast. So I've followed along, and I'm a big fan. And one of the things that I've gotten to notice kind of from the sidelines is that not just particularly just Surgere, but any company that's been in the technology space for a decade or two or three has inevitably had to go from, like kind of analog technology and whatnot and CDs and floppy disks and stuff and go to AI and inject AI and machine learning and all this sort of stuff into their products, because that's just the trend and the wave of the state of the technology right now. I'm kind of curious from your perspective, can you kind of comment on, is there a line in the sand somewhere? Was there a meeting at Surgere at some point that said, all right, we've got to hop on the AI wave. We've got to start using this and providing this as a feature or a benefit to what we're providing our customers? I don't know. Can you give us a taste of that?
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't say it was like a certain meeting or anything. I think we saw, as we can, again, I've been here 7 years. So initially, as our main product was tracking returnable containers, so leveraging passive RFID and hardware at dock doors and things like that. And as we kind of progressed using different types of technologies in order to give, GPS, latitude, longitude locations and, internal locations of these assets, the data just becomes that much more vast, right? So, I think collectively we kind of naturally kind of said, we have so much data. How are we going to possibly provide value to our clients? We didn't have really the insight. How do you take so much data and distill it down into something that's actionable? So for us, AI was kind of a natural progression. And really, Surgere now, I would say over the last 12 months, 18 months, that is kind of the primary focus, is building out our AI capabilities. And, we have it into our platform. We're using it internally. We're using it, not only, the example that I gave, monitoring our hardware, but, throughout our organization. We are using it for lots of different things to make our lives a bit more efficient. And for our clients, I think that is just going to benefit them because we understand how it works. We know how to apply it. And most importantly, we are very big on that human in the loop concept, where we don't want to create an AI or an AI agent that starts making decisions on our client's behalf without them being in the loop on that training, that decision making. So for us, I think it was more of a natural progression into kind of the things we're doing now and the things we'll continue to do into the future.
It would be interesting, like for those companies that use like OneNote and everyone in the company takes all their notes from all their meetings in the OneNote, and you could kind of just like poll and you could do a graph of how many mentions of AI, where was the first.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a homework assignment for you for later, Tom. Let's talk a little bit about this concept of knowing where my stuff is, and really, I guess that boils down to visibility. And one of the questions that I ask a lot of guests is, what does supply chain visibility mean to you? What is the definition of supply chain visibility?
So, when I think of visibility, I think about, where are my things and how long have they been there? That's kind of the visibility, because once I have those primarily two elements, there's so much I can do with that. to boil it down for supply chain perspective, I just want to know where, if there's something I'm looking for, or something I need, something I want, something that a customer needs, or something that a supplier needs, I want to be in the driver's seat. I want to be able to very easily, very quickly know exactly where that specific asset is. And I care about how long has it been there, right? Because there's the whole notion of FIFO and things like that, different types of workflows within supply chain, especially when you talk about cold chain and things like that. That is very important for the first in, first out. So when I think of visibility of supply chain, I don't think of it. I think of it more at a macro level where I want to just know where my stuff is, right, at any given time. And those, over the years here at Surgere, like we started with returnable containers, but now tracking things like finished goods and looking at the whole lineage of, raw goods have come in. I know where my raw goods are. I know where my kits are. I know where the parts that are going to make up those kits are. I know when to bring those kits to the line to do the assembly process. I know when the assembly is done and when it's leaving the assembly line to be staged to go onto the truck. All of those different data elements, there's visibility and there's technology that does that. And that's kind of where, we kind of sit from a Surgere side, is understanding where everything is at any given time, so that we know that we can align with processes and align with workflows and make sure that, the operations, why clients hire us, are as efficient as possible.
Yeah, I think that you really, if we like looked at it, every device is a data point. When you take all those data points and you start bringing them all together into some charts and graphs, you get information. When you
Absolutely.
kind of the next layer on, you're moving up toward that knowledge and wisdom levels, I guess. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just curious, maybe as we start to wrap up here, the given the current state of AI, where do you think AI is on that spectrum of data, information, knowledge, wisdom? Do you think that AI today is able to give us wisdom, or is that maybe where humans have to kind of come in a little bit, or is it giving us knowledge? I don't know. Where are we at the moment? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. In my opinion, I think we are at maybe the beginning stages of knowledge. And the reason why I say that is because, when it comes to AI, I like the comment that your previous guest mentioned. It's the chief recommendation officer. That is great because, it when AI is running through all of the data and whatever you're feeding it, whatever you're prompting it to do, right, it is going to generate a certain level of knowledge that you still have to distill and leverage and make sure you're using it appropriately, right? So from an AI perspective, I think we're right at that knowledge piece right now. And I think over the next several years, as we continue to train and as we continue to, leverage, my data. And that's an important piece, Nathan, is, AI can look at everything across the entire world, right, and bring things in. But as a client, I don't want it to go out to the entire world. I want it to only look at my data and my workflows and my processes and how my people work, so that the models are trained very, very, very specifically to what I do. And that's where I think where you're going to get a lot of wisdom as you continue to do that. And as you're getting human in the loop feedback on my data, on decisions being made, I think that's where the step from knowledge to wisdom will happen.
You're right. We've kind of got to train it on here's all the information that was shared and here's what the humans did with it. And probably enough
Yeah.
revolutions of that of training. Oh, this might be a
Yeah.
dangerous path we're on, but we're training it on how to be wise and think and,
Yes.
and, and make insightful decisions based on the data there. Um, well, thanks for the thought provoking conversation here today. And I'm also so happy that you introduced me to the Oldsmobile Tornado. I'm going to go Google that a little bit later, see what that was all about, and check out that computer that was in the dashboard. But here, as we kind of just roll out of this episode, any last thoughts you want to leave with folks for here today?
No, it's the interesting thing. I think supply chain and other verticals, other markets, AI is going to become one of the primary things that people are using. And I think, you know, it's a good thing as we, as a society, we kind of move forward. But it's also something that's got to be, care and feeded for very, very closely. But
Yeah.
no, Nathan, I appreciate the time today. It was great to chat with you about the many different topics that we had. And yeah, I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.